Hello and welcome once again to episode 66 of Code Completion. We're a group of iOS developers and educators hoping to share what we love most about development, Apple technology, and completing your code. My name is Dimitri and I'll be your host once again for this episode, and I'm joined today by my fellow completionists, Fernando,
Hello, hello.
Ben,
Hey, hey.
and Spencer.
Hey there.
So, Fernando, it's been a few episodes, and Ben, even more. How have you both been?
It's been good actually. Like the amount of work that I had sort of dropped precipitously at work because we have two new members, and that has given me a lot of like time to tweet memes and troll people on Twitter. So I'm back to my old self, and I'm very happy.
Nice. And I'm on the flip side. I'm in the middle of hiring, so I am incredibly busy with interviews and everything else. But I hope to one day aspire to Fernando's level of time wasting once I have more people on my team as well.
Highly recommend.
Yeah.
Goals.
Yeah.
So, Ben, it's certainly been a while since you last joined, as you've said, and I hear you've come bearing gifts, and by gifts I mean a topic. And
Sure.
that topic is one that you're inspired by while interviewing people. So why don't you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So I've been looking to backfill a position and then also expand the team a little bit. So we're getting a chance to hire some more folks, and we're considering people from all different skill levels. But I have happened to interview a whole bunch of juniors recently, and something that I found that was really interesting is that kind of in 2022, where we are in a place, at least in the United States, where iOS-based education has shrunk quite a bit. We're all former bootcamp instructors for iOS. I've taught at two different boot camps, and for a while it seemed like that was really prevalent. There were lots and lots of different schools and stuff that offered iOS education, and since that has shrunk quite a bit. Lite shut down their program. The previous boot camp I worked for doesn't even exist anymore. A lot of other boot camps have gotten rid of their iOS programs. So what seems to be pretty interesting is the fresh, sort of brand new people to our field who are getting into programming and getting into iOS specifically, at least in this case, that's what I've interviewed. They seem to be they seem to be getting their education in ways that are even more kind of self-directed, which is not surprising. So places like Paul Hudson and Sean Allen and John Sandell and all of the sort of the pillars of our community that create great educational content, they're going and they're getting they're learning how to be an iOS dev from those resources. And I this is not at all to denigrate any of that very hard work that those people have been doing to spread, the iOS knowledge around. But something that I thought was interesting as kind of a side effect of that is that based on my admittedly very small sample, but still, many, I interviewed a whole bunch of iOS juniors. They, when I interview them, they have kind of almost a surprising grasp of how to build apps compared to what I might assume based on like their resume or kind of what I kind of was able to glean from them in the beginning about their experience so far. It's like, wow, the apps that they're showing me are pretty like kind of a little bit above their pay grade in the sense of like there's some cool stuff going on here that I wouldn't have necessarily expected a junior of this experience level to have achieved. And then when you dig in a little bit more, what you realize is that in some cases, they're pulling some of this stuff from other resources. And I know that in part because I saw a couple different examples where the exact same implementation of something was shown off in these different projects. And these are people that are not related to each other. They don't know each other. They're not in any way connected. And yet their projects are very different, but they're using the same stuff. So it's clearly coming from one of those resources. And then so you try and dig in a little bit and say, okay, well, how does this work? Or why did you choose this implementation? Or, what was your approach or thought process behind making this decision to build your app in this way? And they, in some cases, give, a pretty decent answer. Sometimes they give kind of a little bit of a shakier answer. In other cases, they just flat up say either I don't know, or they admit, I got inspiration for this solution from X resource. And again, that's not to say that you shouldn't do that. One of the first things that you do when you're learning is you parrot things, right? Someone tells you how to do something, and you parrot it back to them. So in programming, that could be you follow a tutorial, and then you take some pieces from that tutorial and you remix them into your own app, right? Like it's basically parroting with a little bit of remixing. It's one of the steps that you take, certainly on your way to skill mastery, is that kind of step. But something I just found kind of interesting is that, like what you called this, Dimitri, was glossed over knowledge, right? Like knowledge that you get from some trusted resource and you accept as truth, which it's just part of the process. And you even, you can recreate it in a tutorial. You can even sort of remix it slightly into your own solution, and even maybe use it in a way that's slightly different. So that's great, but you just don't have necessarily that backing knowledge, that the why, right? Like I kept saying in these interviews over and over again, in some cases, what you're telling me when I ask you, why did you make this decision? They would tell me the what. They would explain to me what they did, and I say, okay, that's great. That's what you did. That's a good explanation of what you created. But why did you do that, right? Why? And I would try and explain. In programming, everything that we do is essentially for a reason, right? There is a reason why it's there, and if there is no reason for it to be there, it's probably code that you generally speaking shouldn't include in your project, because it's just extra, unnecessary code that is really just going to cause problems down the line. So there really needs to be a reason behind everything, right? And so can you give me the reason? And that's usually tend to be where they kind of would fall down and have trouble. And so I just wanted to sort of bring it up here and talk about it, and talk about maybe what's happening there, what we can do about it as a community, how we can support these juniors, that kind of thing, to help them understand the why. And I think somewhat of a sad consequence of like the bootcamp industry, for whatever reason, shying away from iOS development in particular, is that, not to pat ourselves on the back too much, but I do feel like because we had a lot more time and we had a lot more high sort of touch interaction with individual students compared to like running a watching a tutorial, we were able to delve into the why a lot more. And I feel like that's kind of missing in today's sort of, modern iOS education landscape.
I want to say that although it's like very tempting to say that, oh, maybe if they had a computer science background or they went to school for this, then they would be able to tell you that why. But at the same time, what you learn in a computer science background is not at all what's going to be useful writing apps. Right. And I think some of us like had the experience of actually like taking a few courses in computer science and seeing that, no, this is not at all like what is necessary as like a modern app developer. And I'm talking about either web apps or iOS apps. Is you don't really need to invent new like foundations for computing in general, which is what computer science is kind of more about, from like the most generalized view. But at the same time, like these people that you were interviewing, they do have the same shaky foundations that someone that did not go to school for this might also have. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting in that I think a lot of people that got into making apps or development in general, they came to it from like a self-interest, and therefore they built up a lot of knowledge over a long period of time, and therefore they can back up the why more easily. Whereas a lot of people nowadays may be seeing it as, oh, this is an opportunity that can really change my life, which it absolutely is. But you end up like running into it a lot faster than someone who's kind of doing it just because they're just curious about it. And at that point, you may end up glossing over a lot of the things that someone who's more curious about it may just end up absorbing more naturally. And you need to really be taught those things instead, which those tutorials may not be teaching, really. They might be trying to teach a completely different facet of that goal, but not the one that you were ultimately asking about, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think Dimitri, to expand on Dimitri's point, which I think is really spot on, especially the part about taking years to learn the trade. Um, uh, a few like when I can't speak for anyone else, but when I started, and there was like basically almost no Stack Overflow questions about iOS. uh, I had to like I was really happy or lucky when I found someone writing at length about iOS and about a concept, and usually I would just devour that. And if I was trying to find something like I remember distinctly on the very first app I worked on, Key Ingredient, which was a recipe grazer app. I had to remake a collection view. Well, I had to make a collection view before collection view was a thing. So I couldn't go to like Paul Hudson's amazing website and go, okay, like show me an example of a collection view. Boom, copy, paste, modify, let's go. I had to like understand how a scroll view worked, how to draw views, how to reuse them, how to manually do all of that logic, and I had to build it up. So when like on iOS, I think it was 5, Apple finally introduced the collection view, I was like, oh, neat. Like I just learned the API and I know the why behind most of these APIs. And nowadays, like the information is right there for you to pick. So I'm surprised and not surprised when Ben mentioned like juniors were really like had really high quality apps for their level. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. And then you explained it and I was like, yeah, of course that makes sense. There's really high quality code out there nowadays.
Yeah.
Like you can just go out and find a really amazing tutorial, copy and paste it, modify a little bit, and boom, you got a great app. So that's really cool. My question to round this up would be, are our expectations of a junior wrong? Should it include the why, or should it just include the what? And should we start nurturing the why, like during their first jobs, entry level jobs?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, I think in part it probably depends on how big the team is that they're joining, right? And how self-sufficient they're going to need to be in that role. We just restarted the meetup that I used to host. It's back now, and we very generously got some space here in Orlando to go do the meetup at, and I was talking to the CTO, who's the contact that we got to use the space, and he was saying that he's looking to hire some juniors, but something that he really wants to be focused on is making sure that the ratio of juniors to seniors on his teams are appropriate so that they can hire juniors and that those juniors will then be able to learn and thrive in that environment. And I thought that was a really good point that we all know like the whole, some people think that hiring a junior is just hiring a senior for less money, which is nonsense, right? That doesn't make any sense. But also I think even if you have sort of more noble goals than that, sometimes you can say, oh, well, we're going to hire a junior, right? But the team is only 2 or 3 people, and the goals that you have for somebody on a team of that size compared to the goals you might have for somebody that's on like joining a team of 20, where there are a lot more maybe mids and seniors available to give help for the few juniors that might be on that team. I think that certainly can affect like how you approach answering your question, Fernando, right? Like as a team, let's say a leader of a team, right? And you're like, okay, what is the appropriate thing what is the appropriate approach here for hiring a junior? What are our requirements going to be? And I think the what is definitely on that list, no matter what, right? But then the why, I think I agree with you that like maybe sometimes the why is going to rise to the level of requirement, and then other times it might be more of like a nice to have, depending on the ways that you expect that junior to interact with the rest of the team, right? I mean, if you're hiring a junior and it's a startup, you're gonna probably want to find like the most diamondy of juniors, right? Where they're just you're kind of like blown away by how good they are, and they're only a junior, right? Particularly about the why. But if it's a large team, then and one of your stated goals is to nurture juniors, because you can't just hire them and expect it to happen organically. You do need to basically have a
Yep.
plan. Then maybe only the what is important, and maybe you can teach them the why, right?
This reminds me a lot. This discussion reminds me a lot of a very different hiring practice, which is common in Japan, and not at all like completely foreign here. And it's pretty close to the idea of an apprenticeship, where companies would hire people who have zero experience. And those people would join the company with no experience at all and slowly learn through like the other individuals that are in that company how to be the ideal employee of that company in a way. And as a result, those employees end up staying there for decades. And it's not at all an environment where people are hopping around between different companies. And there's definitely the pros and cons for how is that beneficial and how is it not. But as a result of that, you end up with a situation where people with no experience have a chance at like getting their foot in the door and gaining that experience with generalized knowledge. Like, oh, you have a college education, that's good enough. Okay, now we're going to teach you very specialized knowledge, and that will be very successful here. And you kind of work your way up. And that kind of methodology is very foreign to our like tech sphere in general, I would say, where people are jumping back and forth between companies at like high speed almost. Oh, I spent 3 months here, I spent 6 months here, and then within 2 years you worked at 7 different companies, which seems to be super common in Silicon Valley. And as a result, only people with a lot of experience are kind of valued in that kind of place. And as soon as you stop valuing that person, oh, they move on. So you're kind of encouraged to value them more as a result, and only try for the best because you want people who are not going to leave, essentially, like because there's a whole amount of work trying to get them up to speed and stuff like that. So it's interesting that we kind of fall into this hole where, although we need juniors to continue like the practice of development, like it's not, we are going to grow old and die one day, and there's going to need to be people to replace us, and those people are not going to be necessarily people who are learning about computers from an early age. It's just going to be any path of life can kind of get into it, and we need to make it accessible for those people to kind of get in, if that makes any sense.
On the other hand, if we don't make it accessible, our salaries will continuously go up. Like, there's just going to be less and less of us. Mm-hmm. It's just basic math to me.
Until there's just one programmer making like $1 billion a year.
The Highlander. Yeah, this is the Highlander theory of the Fernando's Highlander theory of development. Yep. There can only be one.
But your point, your point, Dimitri, brought up reminded me of, like, you know, that sort of a common saying in our industry is that credentials and training and stuff, like where that happens, right, isn't nearly as important as what you know. Basically, the saying is like, if you know what you're doing, you can get a job and you can make good money and you can be successful, right? Which sounds very, in general, sounds very egalitarian. Sounds very like, oh, anybody with the skills can come and do that. And I think that is true. That is something that's nice about our field, is that you know, you can kind of come from any background and whatever, and it is possible for you to succeed. But sort of the unspoken, like, other sort of sub point of that, right, is that, like you said, the only people that are really going to be valued in this transaction are the people who bring the skills with them, bring the experience with them, rather than learning them on the job necessarily. Like you were saying, like an apprentice with zero experience. Like, I have a college degree, I'm a smart person in general, I can think for myself, but I don't have any domain knowledge at all over the job that you're hiring me to do, but I will learn it on the job, right? And that's basically, in some respects, the thing that we're telling juniors to do is go get a job and get experience, and then, you know, then you'll be great, right? But like, it's the whole chicken and egg problem. Like, how do you get the experience without the job, and how do you get the job without the experience? And we are, in many cases, we're saying two things that are sort of diametrically opposed, right? Like, go get the experience and you can have a great career. Except when we ask candidates, when we vet candidates, the very first thing we're doing, like, yeah, what experience do you have?
So
Yeah.
sorry, Spencer, go for it.
All right, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, it really does kind of seem like a catch-22 where we do expect that knowledge, but then we're not really giving any resources. We talked about this a little bit kind of when we all left Lambda and we were trying to figure out what to do kind of more as a group here before we ended up forming the podcast. And our thought was sort of, well, we could try to help bridge the gap between basically leaving a boot camp or kind of where these people are that Ben is interviewing, where, you know, they've studied on their own and getting a job, because there is a gap. And we like, that's exactly what Ben saw in those interviews. And that's kind of what we're talking about here. So I think one of the things is, you know, interestingly, I think part of it has to do kind of like Dimitri said with that curiosity, where I think part of it is on them to be able to say, well, okay, I just looked at this tutorial. I'm stuck in tutorial hell. Maybe I can somehow get out of that. I can read documentation to get further understanding. But also, and probably more prominently, it's on us to, as a community, to help them as well. And so I think things like, you know, Ben starting up his meetup again is a great thing to get juniors interested and maybe foster that curiosity, or actually help them learn through the talks that they're giving, or joining Slack groups. I think, you know, we've got some resources, but also obviously it's not enough collectively as a community, because this is kind of, I'd say, prevalent. I mean, it's probably always going to happen in any community, but it seems to be a fairly common theme with juniors that are interviewing. So yeah, I like Ben and Fernando and Dimitri were talking about, I don't know if we need to kind of reset our expectations a little bit on during interviews and say, yeah, we will hire you with less experience, but also, you know, kind of foster that within the company that you work for, or if it is more of a, we need to help them get to that point outside of a company, if that makes sense.
In a way, it's almost like we need to teach people how to be curious about this as a craft. And
yeah, like learning
give them
how to
a reason.
learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or give them a reason to be curious, because a lot of people are getting into it for, frankly, the money aspect, because it makes a lot of money. But there's a reason why they can continue doing it, and that's because they are learning to be better at it, right? Like, this is a grueling job if the only reason you're doing it is to make money. Like, there are easier ways. You can go to school for 4 years and become a doctor. That is probably easier than changing the way you think. No, I'm legitimately serious. I think
probably not a great example
think,
being a doctor, like in the middle of a pandemic.
Okay. So
I even then I would kind of argue, but sorry, keep going.
So what I'm trying to say is, programming and development is not as easy as a lot of people may think it is from the outset, and it really does demand a different way of thinking to excel at it. And something that I've seen from seniors that I never see in juniors is the ability to, on the dime, think about all sorts of different scenarios to solve a problem, which is not something that comes easily. It's something that takes a lot of hard work to nurture and to really change how you behave as like an individual to get to that point. And we need to encourage people to feel like they can do that on their own, so that way they can nurture that skill on their own. And tutorials are maybe not the best way to do that in a way, because it's giving you the answer, right? And it's not letting you learn how to think to get to that answer. And it's
not letting you fail either, right? Like even the failures that occur as part of tutorial following are pretty small in scope and are usually a matter of you read the example wrong, or you misspelled something, or like you forgot to add a line that is in the tutorial but not in your, like, it's stuff that's pretty superficial in its like the level severity of the failure or the severity of the mistake. Whereas if you're, like out on your own in the middle of the field with nothing but, your own thoughts and your own implementation, and it's something that's totally greenfield, you can make mistakes that are that are way bigger in scope and way more time consuming to fix and insidious to even find, right?
Now that you mentioned that, what's a funny thing that I always do with my mentees? When we're in pair programming in the middle of an exercise, like we're building an app or doing something, or I'm code reviewing their code, if they get stuck on a medium or big problem, I screen share and fix the problem for them, right? I coded myself. I explained this is why I would do this. This is this way I'm not doing this, blah, blah, blah. And then once I'm done, we test it, see if it works. And if it works and it never fails to have their jaws drop, I delete everything and it just never reappears. And I'm like, okay, you know how to do it. Like whatever you picked up from my explanation, that's great. Go and do it. And they're usually like, oh, but you had it working already. And I'm like, yeah, I had it working. Like I can do it. I can do it again right now. But you can't. You have to do it. You have to struggle doing it. I wish there were once you read a tutorial, it basically all the code snippets just went away and you had the instructions, and that would be really cool. That would be amazing because I think I agree. Like you need to fail and you need to fumble. It's one of the things that I continuously write about, and I don't know how many times I can rehash this, but you gotta feel lost at sea, right? You gotta be in front of the computer with an open text editor, in this case the IDE or Xcode, and be like, I have no idea what to do, and just do it, right?
Yeah.
Whatever that step 1, open the editor, step 2, question marks, step 3, app. That gap is what needs to happen in order for you to excel, and that is really difficult to teach. Like, I don't know how to teach that in writing. I'm gonna look for like self-destructing tutorials or self-destructing videos. That's
cool.
That is
I think
good.
that's pretty. Yeah, it's a neat idea to explore.
I don't remember what problem it was, but this is in like probably 2013, 2014. I was at work and I was trying to solve a problem, and I don't remember what it was, but I literally spent 2 full-time weeks trying to solve it, and the whole time that I was doing it, I'm like, I don't think that this is possible. I think what I'm trying to do and what the company has asked me to implement, I don't think is actually doable. And the whole time I thought that. I was like, I'm trying stuff, but like I have no faith this is ever going to work, right? And then again, I don't remember what it was, but eventually, after a couple of weeks, I did get it working. It did actually function. I found a permutation of code that made it work properly, and then but up until the minute before that happened, I was convinced that I was like, this is futile. Like I'm going to spend on this forever, and it's never going to happen, right? And I think what you're describing, Fernando, is like, not that I necessarily wish people to spend weeks on something thinking that it's not going to work, but I think sort of the like after that happened to me, right? I feel like my thought process around constructing solutions with code changed a little bit, in the sense that there are things you literally cannot do, right? Like I'm not trying to say that anything's possible, because there's stuff that it's just not, it's either not possible or it's just so like unwieldy that it's not worth doing. But I do think that like that experience, that struggle, did help me to understand that I am more capable than I thought, and what is possible is broader than what I thought before, right? And like if you don't ever, I feel like if you don't ever experience that, it's hard for it. I feel like in some ways maybe it always feels like you're parroting, like always feels like you're just taking someone else's solution and applying it to your problem space, and maybe doing a little remixing, but if you never.
It's the why. I think you started out on the right note. It's the why.
Yeah.
I can copy something from Stack Overflow and paste it, and I won't screw it up because I read how Dimitri screwed up last week. But 99% of the time, none of us here will copy something from Stack Overflow and be like, "Yep, this works. I'm not going to check it. It'll
Right.
just magically work."
And it's the
Right?
same skill that allows you to identify what answer is good on Stack Overflow
Exactly.
immediately.
Yes.
Like the speed at which we, at the very least, can just click on Google, scroll very quickly, identify what the solution is if there is one, or go back. And we didn't even read much of it. We're just scanning with our
That's
eyes
funny.
to identify.
Yeah.
We can do that so quickly. And as Ben said, that feeling of that struggle, it never goes away. Like, I spent the past 4 weeks working on a single problem, and going back to what you said, Fernando, of like, oh, you sitting with someone and then like starting the solution, and someone asks, oh, like, why are we doing it this way? There's no reason why we're doing it this way. We just need to start somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Well,
So
that's true. Yeah.
we start, and it's like, well, we're doing it this way to see if it works. And if it works, then great. If it doesn't, then we're going to have to restart and do that over and over and over and iterate until we do find something that works. But it's all of development is that all the time. Like,
Yeah.
you are going to breeze through the parts that don't require any of that like heavy thought, and you're not even going to notice those, because at every moment you're going to hit that roadblock again and struggle again. And need to
things,
climb over.
especially
Yeah.
on iOS. Like, I saw a tweet earlier this day that it was like, when in the planning stages, like the schedule for a new app, model 3 days, UI 5 days, and then the reality is model 3 days, UI 2 days. 5 weeks trying to fix that one UI Git bug because I had to redo everything from scratch. It's just like you said, Dimitri, you're constantly like, you're breezing, and then bam, you hit a brick wall. And you start going up, and somebody asks you, why are you going up that way? I don't know. I think this is the right way. And then if I find something and I slip, maybe I try another way. Or maybe like Ben, maybe I just keep going through this damn wall until I'm actually good enough to like climb it and get to the other side. So,
Yeah, I think that's a huge thing, is like the patience, right? Where maybe like in that case, Ben didn't know the why of whatever problem he was
I
trying to
probably
solve.
didn't.
But the difference is you had like the patience and perseverance to go through the problem and understand it. Where
Right.
I feel like I sound such a boomer here, but I feel like when you have when you're starting as a developer and you're trying to learn, you now have all of these resources kind of handed to you on a silver platter, and I think that partially may give you a sense of like a lack of patience, where you're like, oh, well, I'll just go find another tutorial. But what if there is no other tutorial?
Yeah.
What if all there is a Stack Overflow answer, and it doesn't really explain things? It just said, this one worked for me. It's in Swift 3. Great. And then you're like, okay, well, I can paste this, but then you don't get that why. So again, it's kind of bridging that gap of how do we foster that patience within ourselves to be able to use the other resources we have that aren't as easy as tutorials.
I think the other thing too is, and this is, I'm just speculating, but I think the other thing is that very similar to that, Spencer, is like, if you're someone in 2022 who maybe have like a year or less experience at development, and you chose iOS and you did a whole bunch of tutorials, right? The other, in addition to maybe having a lack of patience, which I think that's a very astute like observation. I think that other thing is that the tutorial, if that's how you've learned how to code, that's going to make you think that every program you make has a set of Lego instructions that if you just follow them correctly, you will get to the right answer. Right? And that is not true. True, like, you know, I'm out in front with a machete kind of green field doing something new, right? Is a lot closer to putting your finger on a random place on the map and going, we're going here. And they're like, why are you doing that? I don't know, because that's where I put my finger, right? Like, you're just trying stuff to see if it works, right? And then like everybody said, if it doesn't work, you back up and try something else. And it's just like, it's not blind, literally just doing anything, right? You are bringing your skill and your experience, and I've solved a problem that's kind of like this, so I'm going to take a similar approach to see if this also works. Like, it's not just like completely open-ended, but it is. I think maybe the dirty little secret that we can tell all the juniors is that we don't know what we're doing half the time either. Like, it's we're trying to solve a problem, and it is as much about the doing as it is about the why, right? Like you said, you have to just start. You have to just start and do it and see what happens. And if it doesn't work out, you just back up and try something else, right? And you have to have the patience to do that, and you have to have the perseverance to see that through, and all of that. But I think, maybe in addition to the lack of patience, maybe it's also that they're like, where is the tutorial for this? like you said, right? Maybe there isn't
like
one.
entitled. Yeah.
There's a slight caveat to like, I don't know what I'm doing, because there's like the whole meme about the dog in front of the computer, like the two states of being a programmer. You either don't know what you're doing, or you're like a god.
Yes,
that is true. That is 100% true. Yes, but you reminded me. There's an excellent interview by Kara Swisher. I hope I didn't butcher her name, and Wald Mossberg. They're interviewing, I'm pretty sure it's both Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. Mm-hmm. And at one point, Jobs is like, paraphrasing here, but he basically says, I come to work every day because there's like a fog and nobody really knows what's out there, but you sort of like can barely make it out, right? I think that's how it feels for me when I'm coding and I don't know exactly where I'm going.
Yeah.
It's like, it's not necessarily that I'm just like fumbling around.
Right.
Though there are times when you're like,
sure,
I just got to throw something out there. Yeah. But usually it's like there's a very heavy fog and there's a few lights. Yeah. And like Dimitri said, you can immediately, due to experience, you can immediately recognize like that one's probably not it. Right. So it's probably this one.
Yeah.
And you're just trying to slowly walk towards there. Yeah. And it's very difficult to share that feeling. I think there needs to be stakes, honestly, and not delicious beef steaks, but like there needs to be something at stake. And when you're like copying from a tutorial for your own app, there is nothing at stake, right? You just copy and paste, and if it doesn't work, who cares? You go and try another tutorial or another thing or another Stack Overflow question. But when you're at work, it's like, oh shit, I need to get this done. Like in your example, right?
Yeah.
Like
that's why I kept going, really.
Exactly.
Because it was like, I'm the person that everyone's looking at that's expecting this to work out, right? So like I can't just go to my boss and be like, I'm sorry, it's not possible.
It's
right?
not, it's not going to work.
That's not an answer that's going to work, right? So I just have to keep going and just kind of assume on one hand that this is probably not possible, and on the other hand be like, but it'll work out, which is a weird, that's two weird thoughts to have in your brain at the same time. But I think, sometimes it's what you have to do.
Yep. Sometimes it's what you have to do.
And I think your fog analogy is great. I think like as a junior, it's a fog where maybe it's like really heavy fog and you have very dark sunglasses on, right? So like you can barely see anything, right? Whereas as a senior, the glasses are off, right? So you can see with your sort of raw eyeballs, you don't have anything in the way, but it's still a heavy fog. So maybe there's some shadowy figures that you can make out. And like you said, it's like, that's probably not right. That shape doesn't look right? Or whatever. Even though you don't actually know what it is completely, you're like, this shape looks wrong, so I'm going to go over here. Whereas a junior, it's so thick and dark that you're just like, I'm just kind of grasping at whatever because I don't have a frame of reference, right?
And that's the thing about experience, right? You can see the shape, but it's your experience that, no, it doesn't look right. Whereas if you're a junior, even if you didn't have the glasses on, which I like the addition of the glasses, even if you didn't have them on, you've never seen that shape.
Right.
So you can't understand what's right and wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or if you're navigating the same fog, like either way, you see a forest of trees all around you, but experience can tell you how to identify what's past the trees, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Where you can kind of go in any direction, but then you'll know to track the sun and go in the right direction at the end of the day. And you won't get lost from taking side tracks and things like that. And that is something that you can only get through experiencing it, right?
Yeah.
The experience is exactly that. You need to live through that moment of pain to really learn the lesson. Because you won't learn it otherwise. You'll just know that it exists. It's like, oh, I know that this is possible. I saw Fernando write it right in front of you. But you don't. You didn't pay the attention that you needed to actually learn the lesson.
Well, you didn't pay the price, right? Like you got it for free instead of
you just
paying
decided,
a price. Yeah.
And you could have absorbed that, but you didn't, because that's not what you were looking out for. You were looking out for, I need to find a solution, not what is the solution to solve this problem. And it's hard, definitely. Like, I remember Fernando like tweeting at me earlier today about like the difficulties with learning Japanese, and I tweeted back to him a nice little comic of it was an Oh No comic by Alex Norris, and there's success at the top of a mountain, and it's like, oh no, I didn't realize I have to actually put work into getting that success. And it's exactly that. You need to actively push yourself to be able to do this well. And you don't necessarily need to do this well. Like, there's lots of work and development that does not need you to rebuild a collection view. And in fact, that was the whole point of Apple's Cocoa frameworks when they originally came out, is look how faster someone can make an app that is functional and that gets the job done and that's easy to use using our frameworks than the competition. And they actually did competitions like this of, here's a C++ programmer and here's a Cocoa programmer, and they're going to write the same kind of app. And the Cocoa programmer was done in a fraction of the time, and they had nice things for free as a result of this. So
what's kind of... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you don't necessarily need this advanced knowledge to, rebuild a collection view from scratch, even though, ironically enough, I've done that. I've done exactly that. And I learned a lot through doing that. And I learned how to do it better, so that way the next time I did it better. Because it's not just once that I ended up doing that. But that's exceptionally freeing once you can have those skills, because it's just like needing a calculator to do basic math versus just doing it in your head. You have no qualms about calculating a quick tip or doing some quick math without pulling out something to verify the answer, because you are confident that you have the answer because you put in the effort to memorize your multiplication tables, learn about order of operations, and be without any sense of worry that you're going to do it wrong in the process. Whereas you can totally just pull out your calculator. In fact, we all carry around calculators 24/7 now. So that is totally an A-okay thing to do. But you can also do the alternative of not needing that. And yes, it might take the same amount of time or longer, but you can do more things with that toolbox, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I was going to say, as a callback to Fernando's point about that there need to be stakes, I think it's something that's kind of sad about how we assess people for purposes of interview, right? And particularly as it pertains to juniors, is, I mean, as we all know, the technical interviewing process in modern software jobs is pretty broken, and most companies do it poorly, and most interviewers are not very good at interviewing, right? And in part, I think it's because it's a skill that none of us practice very often, except for when we're interviewing. So as little as you interview for a job, probably, in some, certainly this is not always true, but in many cases, it's you also interview others as infrequently as you might interview for a job. So it's just hard to practice. But as far as the stakes, the people that I interviewed, the stakes suddenly became the why, and not knowing the why suddenly became very real when they're in an interview with me and I'm asking them the why, and so that everyone that's listening understands kind of how I run my interviews. I don't think personally that things like lead code questions or random pseudocode algorithm whiteboard stuff is really all that useful as far as assessing people, because I want to know, there's basically, for one thing, it's it's mostly irrelevant to the work that we do as iOS devs. And also, there is a huge like collection of questions that I can ask you about our domain specific knowledge that is super difficult to answer well. I don't need to go out and ask you some weird esoteric computer science question to stump you. I can stump you with all kinds of stuff that we do. Our stuff is very complicated. So I can make it as difficult as I want. But what I will say is, like, the way that I do it is I have them bring a project that they have worked on, which is why I saw those duplicates in the code implementation, because I want them to feel comfortable with the code so that they can speak confidently. Like, the whole point is to try and get them to succeed, not fail. Like, I want to put the burden of I have to pick the best person because they all did a great job versus, well, these 14 people sucked and I set them up for failure and they bombed, right? Like, that's not how I want to run my interviewing process. I want to give them the chance to all succeed, and then it's sort of on me to like split hairs and try and find like the best person for the gig, right? But I will say that, you know, I ask questions like why, right? Why did you do this? And suddenly you can see in their faces, it's in some cases, right, where it's like, I think I hope that I prepped them well enough for the interview. I said, bring a project that you're really comfortable with. Make sure that you've recently looked at it, right? Make sure that you're familiar with the layout and the design and what choices that you made. And I'm going to have you demo it for me, and then we're going to jump into the code, and I'm just going to point at pieces of your code and ask you to explain them. That's basically what I told them as the prep. So I feel like, you know, that's probably more than most interviewers are going to tell you about what the interview is going to be like, right? So I feel like I didn't like, here's the list of questions I'm going to ask you. I didn't go that far, but I tried to sort of set them up for success. But I can tell you, when I said, like, why did you do this way, or explain to me kind of the pros and cons of this approach versus some other way that you could do it, right? Because I want to understand how they approach the process of building software. Sometimes the faces that they would give me are just like, oh crap, this was not in the tutorial. I don't know. I don't know how to answer this. And then I think the other thing is, because the interviewing process is so broken in our industry, they immediately are so afraid of not answering my question that they don't want to say I don't know, right?
Right.
And their tendency is like, if I don't know what it is, I'm just going to make up something because I have to answer this question, right? And so if anybody tried to do that, I tried to say, listen, I don't know is a perfectly reasonable answer. and I don't expect you to know the answer to every question I ask you. So, and it is much worse if you try and BS an answer to me rather than giving me just a straight up humble, I don't know, right?
I was going to say, they're very
random
good
data.
Yeah.
Nil is
Dimitri, sorry, I didn't hear you. You go first, and then I'll go.
Okay.
Nil is a better result to have than random data.
Yes, for sure.
It depends on the language.
I'm stealing that and using that.
Please do.
What was I going to say? Probably a dumb joke.
Sorry.
Yes.
It's a reasonable assumption coming from you.
Yes. Yeah, it's okay.
But basically, I was saying, like, the look on their faces, they were surprised, right, and that they didn't know what to do. But they knew that nothing, or I don't know, was not the right thing to do, right?
Right. So there's very very few ways of making me like truly angry, and trying to bullshit me when I'm asking a question, like especially at work.
Yeah.
Or at an interview. That's a surefire way of me getting like really angry on your face. Like, that's not what I'm not here to waste my time. Like, I just want to do my work and then go and do my thing. So if I have to spend like 5 minutes here trying to like go through your bullshit, I'm gonna be very angry. So I will be very happy if like I ask you something and you're like, I tried it because this is what I know. I don't know of anything else.
Yeah.
Perfect. Totally fine. Let's explore something else. But because this is the best, stop. No, I don't have time for this. Like, I know you don't know. Don't make me say it. Right.
Right.
It's just,
Well, and what I told the juniors when I would say, like, you know, please tell me I don't know, and please tell other people in interviews that you go on I
Right.
don't know, right? Make sure that you feel comfortable saying that, and if they give you crap for that, you don't want to work there, right? That's not a
Exactly.
good sign.
Yep.
Because, and I said the reason why you don't want people, I mean, in case it's not clear, why you don't want people who are BSing their way through answers is because not only do we then have this dance where like, I know you don't know what you're talking about, you're trying to lie to me, and like that's bad, right? But also what I fear even more than that is that you, as a member of my team, are going to do that to a colleague who maybe is even more junior than you or
Yep,
whatever,
yep.
right? And or maybe you advance and you become more of a senior, and then now you're giving out this terrible advice, right? And then the person that's getting the help doesn't know the difference, and now you're propagating this bad information, and like it infects the team, and it becomes toxic, and that is not something that I want to support on my team because it's not going to make us productive, right? So in addition to you looking bad in the interview setting, I also am filtering people like that out, most importantly, because I don't want that kind of approach, right, to be part of the team.
Now I'm angry because I'm imagining people telling me bullshit. My night is ruined.
Sorry, Fernando.
The whole thing is like we've all been there. We all know what we don't know, right? We've all had a time where we don't know something. So
Sure.
it's kind of like, well, just
admit it, right?
Just be honest, right?
Just
Like,
be honest, yeah.
as a senior, I'm not saying me, I'm saying you all don't know everything, and I know you don't know, and it's like, why are we expecting
everything.
junior?
I don't know about you,
except
but-
for Dimitri. Sorry, he's the exception, not the rule, though.
Yeah.
So
Just doing
why do we expect juniors?
Completely
to know
joking, by the
everything?
way. It's not clear.
Yeah.
Definitely don't know
doing
everything.
A little introspection. I think I'm angry because it took me a lot of work to get to where I am, right?
Yeah.
And to learn the things that I do know, like we've just been discussing, like it's painful. Like you just don't go and read something out, boop, it's just in
Right.
my head now. Like I
Right.
will always remember it. Like you have to stumble a few times. I've looked for, I think it's happened to all of us. I've looked for the same Stack Overflow question maybe 10 times until I'm like at the 11th time, I'm like, okay, maybe I should just memorize this, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm inflicting pain upon myself going to Google every single time. So when somebody tries to bullshit you, it's like you're trying to avoid the pain, and it costs me a lot of pain. So no, you don't get to skip over that and pretend you're like here with us, the painful. I don't know how to say that, but you get my idea, right?
Fired up. Fernando's fired up with this. I may be misattributing this, but I think it might have been Andrew Madsen who said one time that like he actually went and looked up an answer on Stack Overflow and it ended up being an answer that he had written. I could have been somebody else,
Right.
But
Yeah.
but like that sort of story, right? That's true. I mean, you not only do you not know everything, but you forget stuff, right? Stuff that you used to know pretty well. You're like, I don't know that so well anymore because I just haven't used it in a while or whatever. And yeah, the idea that we expect juniors in particular in interview settings to be, like I actually unfortunately heard some kind of horror stories from some of the juniors who I talked to. We were just chit-chatting a little bit here and there, and I shared a couple of stories about interviews that I had been on, and they shared some horror stories of people saying like, yeah, I was asked to write this whole thing in like an hour, and when I asked if I could look anything up, they were like, no, you can't use the internet. You can't. It's like, what is happening? Like who? Like,
Where am I going to work?
yeah. Like, am I going to go work in a little Faraday cage all by myself
Yeah.
with just an air-gapped computer? Like, I don't. It doesn't make any sense. Right? I can't ask anyone any questions. I can't look anything up. I can't. It's just like that is such an artificial environment that is so disconnected from the actual work that we do in real life that it's, for one thing, not any. It's not. It doesn't tell you anything useful, right? And for another, it just seems cruel, right? To like put someone through that. In fact, if I found out that a member of my team was never looking anything up, never looking at the docs, and never asking anybody any questions and
They
writing
don't
code,
even have an internet connection.
yeah, I would probably fire them because it's like you are so misappropriating the company's resources by spending 14 times the
Yep.
amount of time that you needed to spend on this because you patently refuse to get help from any resource. Like that's actually not a skill that I want to foster or encourage. Right? I want the opposite. Like, go look it up or ask someone or look at the docs or, like, yeah, it's so weird. It's such a weird, like, bizarro world compared to the actual job that we all do every day.
Yep.
So to tie us all off and finish it off, I have a small story of a recent interview that I was doing. And as a part of that, they opened up a coder pen so that way I could draft out a data model. So this wasn't actually like make anything that compiles. It was just like, hey, this is a scratch pad that you can go ahead and use to describe what you're working on. And in that moment, I, as someone with a lot of experience, frankly, and I can say with confidence I know what I'm doing for the vast majority of cases. As soon as I did not have Xcode and I had to stare at a camera and not my keyboard while I was typing, I could not write any code. That was like my hands would start to drift and I would type gobbledygook, and I'm not looking at what I'm typing because I'm looking at a camera. Nor am I looking at the keyboard. So oftentimes what I will do is I will like build up a buffer of what I want to type, and then I will look at the keyboard and start typing that. And I know what I'm typing because I'm verifying with my fingers, so I know what shows up on screen. And no matter how slow Xcode is, I've gone very good at just typing and just watching Xcode just fill in the blanks because I can build in that buffer. Now, without any of that, I could not write any code. I was trying to write like a codable struct, and I'm like Swift A of type codable, and then getting some square brackets instead of curly, and I looked like a mess, frankly, like from someone else's point of view. So if anyone like does hold interviews, like keep in mind that even the best of us will
Intentions.
will like completely struggle when it comes to not using a tool that we're used to or doing it in an environment where we aren't. Like it took me a while to like realize that it wasn't nerves that was doing that. It was just the fact that I wasn't staring at my keyboard. And I'm not going to like stare at my keyboard while I'm talking at someone. So that was like the lower priority. And I didn't even think about why I was struggling at that. So it really does kind of, it's very bizarre how we have very different practices during an interview process than like during the actual work. And it would almost be better if we as a community got used to, hey, maybe we contract for 1 week as a trial period to see how you do. And that is your interview process. You get paid for it. And if you don't end up doing any work, it's not going to cost very much because you're not going to end up paying for anything. And if you do good work, then like you're immediately a keeper. And as you as the person doing it, know a little bit more about the project you're going to be working on and can ask for more as a result, saying like, hey, this was actually really easy. I think you should be paying me a little bit more than $40 an hour. It's very interesting how we've kind of landed at this place. And for all the people who are hiring that happen to listen to the show, do keep in mind that not everyone is going to succeed like upon first meeting. Whereas they can succeed much better working at a different shift than what you're used to. Maybe they're not morning people, and that morning meeting that you have them come to the first thing of the week, they don't even remember what they were working on last week because they just woke up. So like all sorts of different like paths that brought us here, do keep those in mind, both during hiring and both like when you're working with people. Everyone's different, right?
I read about a study recently that they took college students and they gave them I think they were all like basically programming majors, and they split them up into different groups and they put them in like little sort of study rooms, so like a conference table and a whiteboard as its own separate little room. And they had some rooms and they had them all do the exact same problem, and it was like a pseudocode whiteboarding kind of thing. And it was all the same problem, and in some cases they told them that you had no time limit. You could take as long as you needed, and there was no real restrictions other than just like on the whiteboard, just draw it all out, right? And in some cases, they put a camera in the room, and they obviously told the candidate that you would be monitored by some senior devs to watch how you solve the problem. And then in other cases, there was no camera. They were not being watched. That was the only difference between the two groups of students. And it was a statistically significant difference, and it was like not by a couple points. It was a lot. That the students that were not being watched solved the problem more completely. They solved it with a better implementation. It was they did it in faster in some cases. It was in every possible sort of metric. It was that theirs were better than the kids that were being watched. And so because the question that was being asked was basically like, in an interview setting when I'm staring at you while you're trying to solve a problem, is that all by itself part of the issue? And it does seem to, this one study does seem to show that there maybe is something to the idea that if you're being watched and that it can affect your ability to think through the problem, to do it quickly, to come up with an interesting solution, all those things. Which I think is funny because that is pretty much always what a technical interview is, and that is very rarely what it is to actually do the work for on the day to day.
And that's not to say like go ahead and give everyone take home like exams,
right?
I would say as a company, if you're going to give someone a take home, pay them for it. Don't give them something that they're going to waste their time on, because especially if they don't get the job afterwards, they are going to be bitter, and that bitterness is going to prevent you as a company from getting more candidates in the future, the more people that you inflict this bitterness upon. So like keep that in mind.
And not only the take-home tests, like some of the bigger companies do like 6-hour interviews. I saw a tweet about someone applying for Apple remotely. And then they were like the Apple interviewers were like, okay, yeah, just reserve so and such day from 9 a.m. to like 3 p.m. for interviews. And I'm like, what? Remotely? Are you insane? How are you going to have 6 hours of interviews remotely? That's like, it's even grueling when you're like with someone else. But there's the small moments of like chit-chatting, moving from one place to another, like presenting yourself, etc. Like the small interactions that you have. But like remotely 6 hours of Zoom meetings, interviews, that's not how work is. So why would you even start there? It doesn't even make sense.
Yeah. How are they going to make a decision, right? It's going to be an interview by committee at that point.
Yeah. Right.
And just like design by committee, that never ends well. And you end up not finding the candidates that are actually going to be beneficial to you. You just find the candidates that make everyone happy. And
going by your point, like it's not being paid. Like you're not being paid for those 6 hours. So it's the same thing as a take-home test. If a take-home test takes more than an hour or two, which it should, because like you can't judge someone by like an hour project. So if it takes more than 2 hours, you should be paying people. Like it sucks that you're not.
But I would say by the same token, I don't know how much. So like maybe everyone will send us email and say that I'm terrible for the way that I do this. But my interview process has been so far a 30-minute sort of getting to know you, understanding your career goals, understanding your experience history and your training and stuff. And then an hour-long technical interview with me where, like I said, they bring a project they've worked on and we go through it. How much more, and let's say we're talking about juniors in particular, how much more are you going to learn about someone's ability to do the job in a 6-hour back-to-back, like just grueling interview process than I do in an hour of asking them to explain what their code's doing, how it works, why it works, right? Like like I said, agreed. I'm going to say something that's the opposite of what I said before, which is that it's not that complicated. Like it is very complicated, but basically either someone understands the basis of what they're trying to accomplish and they're thoughtful about the engineering work that they do, or they're not. Like
I have a perfect analogy. Yeah. Like if you had like a professional piano player, someone that's like part of an orchestra, and you had like someone that's an amateur that's been practicing the piano for 1 or 2 years, like it doesn't take a lot of time to realize which is which if you put them to play like a piece, right? If you tell both of them, bring me a piece that you like to interpret, that it's at your skill level,
right?
It'll be almost immediately obvious which is which, right?
Yeah.
It's the same thing as that you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, if they can fool you for an hour, they're at least worth consideration. Because it's like, wow, that's actually impressive. Like, I'm not even mad that you fooled me because I learned something. But
can
it
fool you
just
for an
doesn't
hour,
happen
they're
in
worth
programming, right?
That's great.
It's so good.
Yeah, no, but that's true, right? I mean, well, and maybe this is incredibly like arrogant of me, but like I think in general, in an hour, it's going to be relatively clear to me whether
Yes.
you know what you're talking about or you don't, right?
Yep.
I honestly don't think you could necessarily, if we're talking about a genuine fresh green junior who's done 3 tutorials and then read a bunch of stuff and is trying to fake their way through a senior level interview, right? I don't think that there's probably too many people on the planet that could do that successfully. And at the end of the hour, I'd be like, this person has, despite their resume, this person has 20 years of experience because it's obvious, right? Like that I don't think that's possible, right? Like it's going to be pretty clear that you're going to be able to basically, like you said, you're going to be able to narrow in, like, oh, this person seems to have about this much experience, right? Based on the answers to the questions that I asked, right? Even if you couldn't, maybe you can't see them. Maybe it's like The Voice, right? Like they just show up and you ask them questions and they tell you, and you can't see their code or whatever, but they're just explaining it to you. Or like in your piano analogy, right? They're playing the piece, right? It's going to be pretty obvious. If it's chopsticks, then unless it's the best chopsticks you've ever heard,
right?
They're probably pretty new. Like,
let's do a speed run. Let's just get random people. We'll do interviews, each of us, and whoever gets like the lowest time, like any percentage, just wins.
Well, lowest time and accurately assesses their experience level.
Well, we'll do 2 categories.
So it's a
All
low
right, 2
percent.
categories. All right.
Awesome interviews done quick.
Yes,
There you
that's
go.
perfect.
Nice.
Actually. So this week's episode of Code Completion is brought to you by Huuungry. Huuungry, that's Hungry with 3 U's, is the iPhone, iPad, and Apple Watch app you turn to when you really want to eat but are blinded by the multitude of choices available to you and your insatiable hunger. Huuungry isn't here to help you discover new restaurants or flavors. No, it has a much more humble purpose. You tell it all about your favorite restaurants, and it will deploy its cryptographically advanced random number generator, invoked by shaking your phone in frustration, to make the decision of what to eat for you. Stuck at home in quarantine and sick of ordering pizza? Use Huuungry. Did Huuungry just suggest pizza again? Don't fret, as options for another cuisine, a cheaper option, something closer, or simply another option are just a button away. Huuungry also comes with a collection of fun animated iMessage stickers so you can share your hunger with others. Thanks again to Huuungry for sponsoring our show. Search for Huuungry, that's Huuungry, on the App Store today to give it a try. So, lately, it's been really dry, and I wanted to get a better feel for what our indoor air quality was like. So, since I keep buying stuff, I figured we might keep this mini review corner segment going. And I got this nifty little device, and this is the qingping Air Monitor Lite. And it will just cycle through like different air quality stuff, like temperature, humidity, CO2, and then the PM 2.5 and PM 10 micron like particles, which is super helpful in California as we always have forest fires. So knowing when to shut all the windows and stuff like that. And yeah, it's been super nice. So I highly recommend it if you need an HomeKit compatible air like monitor thing. There's like 3 options. There used to be 4, now there's just 3, and this is the nicest looking of them. So we bought 2 so far. I'm probably gonna buy more for the entire house. And then you can just ask Siri like, what's the humidity like, and she'll tell you. And that's super neat. I know she'll give you the range too, which I didn't even think she'd be smart enough for, but yeah.
That's pretty cool. I have an Aware on my kitchen, and I think it's just eye-opening when you can check the air quality immediately. Like I start cooking,
especially in the
gas
kitchen
stove.
when you're cooking.
Yeah, exactly. On the gas stove, and I immediately, like 2 minutes, you can see the air quality just drop. And it's been an eye-opener, like, oh yeah, I should probably open up a window because it's at like 1,000 parts per million for carbon dioxide. You start losing some faculties, right? You're not going to like drop dead at any moment, but you start losing some faculties, and it's really easy to get to that level and then just go back to normal. So having a way to measure it is really, really cool. So I'd recommend getting any good and decent air monitor.
especially if you're in an office for like all day. Like your
Right.
CO2 has filled that office.
Yep.
Same for if you're sleeping in your bedroom with like 2 people and pets. That bedroom is full of CO2 by the morning. And you might notice, like on days where you feel good, that CO2 did not climb, and on days where you don't feel so good waking up, the CO2 was very high the whole time. As Fernando said, definitely recommend just for that, and also to monitor your gas stove usage, because oh boy, California has a thing called Prop 65, like known to the state of California to cause cancer, and it is on everything, and it's like a joke. But like certain things you just don't think about. It's like, oh yeah, we've always had a gas stove, like for generations. Have a window open, because that thing has a lot of byproducts that are not so great. But yeah, great for cooking, but not so great for you. So with all that out of the way, it's time for Compiler Error, a segment where I get to test my fellow completionist knowledge about Swift, Apple, and all things development. And today we have a wonderful theme, and that theme is the origin of various tutorial sites.
How apropos.
Ooh.
So we have 4 statements today. The first one, Swift by Sundell was started in 2015 with the launch of Swift 2.0 and debuted with an article all about optionals. Statement number 2, Paul Hudson's Two Straws screen name comes from the fact that as a kid, he found it a pleasure to treat himself to 2 straws with his milkshake. Statement number 3, Sean Allen started his teaching career vlogging on YouTube since around 2017, but was actually in his audience's shoes 2 years prior to that with no programming experience. And statement number 4, Paul Hudson wrote his first books as early as 2005 and has developed over 100 apps. So, Fernando, since you and Spencer won last time, why don't you go first?
I think it's number 3. Final answer.
Wow.
Next one.
Confident.
Okay, Spencer?
Confident or hubris, we'll find out.
I'm a senior developer, Ben.
Oh,
Oh, well, in that case.
you also know everything. It feels weird that Swift 2.0 came out in 2015, but I think that's right. I don't know. This sounds terrible of me, but I mean, has Paul Hudson developed over 100 apps? I mean, I'm like, depends on what you qualify as an app, so I'm not sure. I know he was a writer for like a newspaper or something before. I'll go with number 4. Not super confident, but the 2 straws and Swift by Sundell seem plausible.
And Ben?
So first, I'm going to apologize to John Sundell, Paul Hudson, and Sean Allen because I don't know their backstories nearly as as well. They probably should, but I feel like I don't know. I have actually been curious, but I don't know what Paul Hudson's Two Straws screen name, like the backstory, is on that. I feel like that's a plausible answer, though. The Sean Allen thing sounds right. At least like the vlogging thing sounds about right, that he started in 2017. And I could buy the idea that he hadn't been a dev of, more than 2 years before that. And again, I think just like Spencer, right? It depends on what you qualify as an app, but I could believe that Paul has written that many apps. I mean, certainly if you include all the examples and stuff he's written for his tutorials and books, I'm sure it's way more than that. But again, depending on what you could qualify an app, I feel like John Sundell has, if he's really been doing this for 7 years, then I'm genuinely old, because I don't feel like it's been that long that he's had Swift by Sundell. So I'm just going to go with my gut. That's what I thought was maybe the false one from the get-go. So I'm just going to go with my gut and say it's number 1. Final answer.
An excellent choice. So let's all start with number 2, because you all kind of agree with that one. So Paul Hudson's Two Straws screen name comes from the fact that as a kid, he found it a pleasure to treat himself to 2 straws with his milkshake. And this is absolutely true. So
Yes.
Good job so far. He shared this in an interview, which was in a podcast that I am not remembering at the moment. because I failed to take notes. Story of my life. He found it humbling that as a kid he was in such a situation where like being able to trade himself to 2 straws like made him feel like he could like have stuff. That's the reason why he uses that screen name, and it's carried with him for all these years with his ultimate success. So that's why he keeps it. So good job so far, and now I have to pick between the 3 of you of who's going to be false.
We've made
first.
it difficult for you, Dimitri.
So let's start with number 4.
No.
So
Sorry, Spencer.
You think that Paul Hudson either did not write his first books as early as 2005 or has not developed over 100 apps. And if you go to hackingwithswift.com/about, it seems to claim that he has written over 100 apps. So that's from the man himself. But did he write his first books as early as 2005? And the answer is yes. So sorry, Spencer.
He's old
what do you
school.
think those books were about?
Well, they weren't about
Catchup,
iOS
see?
since it didn't exist.
So I found some early
should
books
know
about
this.
ESP and Speaking to Ghosts by a Paul Hudson, a very different Paul Hudson. I was
gonna say.
Irrelevant. But the ones I
PHP.
did find, yes, it was PHP.
Yes.
And others were on Linux. So he's
Nice.
been doing this for quite a while. So don't go ahead and think that like overnight success just comes. It's something that's nurtured over a long period of time.
not
So, Fernando, you next. So you think that Sean Allen either did not start his teaching career vlogging on YouTube since around 2017, or that he did not have, or he actually did have programming knowledge or something along those lines. But this is also completely true as well. So if you go to his YouTube channel, you'll see
won
that
one.
he has videos going back all the way to 2017. And one of those videos is how I learned from no programming experience whatsoever to become an iOS developer in 7 months. And he, on his site, if you go on the Wayback Machine, you can see articles that he used to write of like his journey along the way. So he absolutely did like go through tutorials, go to a boot camp, and teach himself iOS development. And he's nurtured his own knowledge to the point where, like, teaching others, which, like, honestly, if you need to teach others, you really start to think about, like, what you know and what you don't know. And that's a great way to really excel. So he's done exactly that, and that's why he's where he's at this point.
The only reason I chose number 3 was because I thought, like, I almost fell into Ben's trap when he said, like, Swift by Sundell 2015. No way, I'm that old. I was like, 2017? No, that is completely wrong. Like,
No
he
one's
started
heard of
on,
Sean
like,
Allen back then.
2014.
5 years ago? Yeah.
Yeah, he started on 2013 or something, like a long time ago. Damn. That's awesome.
Yeah. So that absolutely means that number 1 is the compile error. So good job, Ben. So Swift by Sundell, when did you think it was started?
Yeah, 2015 seems too early. For some reason,
Agreed.
2018 sticks in
Yep.
my head, but I don't know if that's right.
So if I say 2011, what would you say?
That he started Swift by Sundell in 2011?
Yeah, that's fake.
Yeah,
it's
because
That
2017.
was before Swift.
Before Swift even
that
came
he
out,
was
like
fresh and
he was like getting like some kind of mind meld with Chris Latner and just like getting all of the fresh Swift data and publishing it.
Yep. So he absolutely did start in 2017, according to his website. And it has nothing to. The first article is nothing to do about optionals. It was something about like how you do error handling or stuff like that. So yeah. Good job, Ben. Sorry, everyone else. You used up your luck on the last one.
That sounds about right.
yeah, it's fine.
And as always, I want to personally thank everyone for listening in this week. Please be sure to follow us on Twitter at CodeCompletion to know when new episodes get released, and feel free to tweet at us if there's ever a topic you'd like for us to dig into. Most importantly, as a small podcast, please be sure to share this with your friends and family who are also interested in any part of the process of app development. It's your support that enables us to continue doing this, and we hope to grow a healthy community around everything we discuss. Once again, I want to give my thanks to Fernando, who is at From Junior to Senior. That's FROMJRDOSR on Twitter. Ben, who is at Ferris Guy. That's FERROUSGUY on Twitter. And Spencer, who is at Spencer C. Curtis. That's SPENCRCCURTIS on Twitter, for joining me this week. My name, once again, is Dimitri, and you can find me at Dimitri Bouniol. That's DIMITRIBOUNIOL. And we'll see you all next week.
Bye.
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 So as a super short commented out, I was reminded of a story of my childhood. When I was like 10 or 12, I had a copy of the Development Tools CD, and on there was sample code for like a helicopter game. And I was like into doing programming. So someone who I knew was like teaching programming at college, and I wanted to impress them. So I went ahead and said, "Oh, hey, look at the thing that I like have been putting together." And they immediately started like, "Oh, how did you do this?" Or like, "Did you use an object to implement this?" And I had no clue. And that's very quickly when I started like backpedaling and saying like, "Oh, well, this is like sample code," and I was like playing around with it and all of that. And it reminded me exactly of like what Ben was saying with the interviewees like backpedaling their story once they realized that they didn't actually know very well how something was put together. So I guess I learned that lesson very early, the shame of like plagiarizing. So I had plenty of time to work on it from that point to my first interviews.
That's funny.
But yeah, I immediately thought of that like as soon as we started the episode, and I was like, I'll save this for the end because yeah, but we've all been there.
Funny. Yeah.
It's just the power of compounding returns. If you hate being wrong and you're constantly wrong for a while, like, you'll stop being wrong most of the time. Right?
Yeah.
I went, during the episode, I went into my Stack Overflow profile, and I realized that the first answer I gave was 12 years ago.
And it was wrong.
On July 1st. And it was completely wrong. It's minus 15. No, I'm kidding. But it was like, it's a long time that we've been, like, at least I've been doing this. And it's just compounding returns. You just can't not learn during that long of a time.
Yeah.
Although I had a great joke when you said, Dimitri, like, you fumbled through that interview because, like, it was, like, out of your element. I couldn't, like, sneak it in, but I had a great joke about, like, has anyone actually seen Dimitri code? Because it's like, I don't know.
We all just assume.
There's just screenshots at the end of it. It's like, oh, look at this pretty thing I made.
Yeah. That would have been
66 episodes in, he must be really good at BSing. then.
Exposed. Jimmy.
like I said, I wouldn't even be
Cancelled.
Time error.
Yeah. I wouldn't even be mad if Dimitri's like going at episode 100 and he's like, guess what? I'm not a programmer. I know nothing about computers. Bye.
It's like and you notice from like the weirdest thing is like, oh, so I wanted a constant, so I put it as a var, and you're like, constant var.
Wait, what?
Wait a minute, and then you like pull the mask off like at the end of the end of Scooby Doo.
That would be great.
Okay, that's all we got. Bye,
All right.
Stuff.